The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. in the Dakota Building, December 1980, 3 weeks before the world would change forever. John Lennon had just come back from the studio, still wearing his leather jacket, his hair damp from the cold rain that had been falling all evening over Central Park. He didn't want to answer. He was tired, the kind of tired that comes from spending hours in a small room with headphones on, listening to the same 3 minutes of music over and over, adjusting a guitar tone by fractions, moving a microphone half an inch to the left, searching for something perfect that doesn't exist. But YOKO, standing near the window with her arms crossed, nodded toward the phone. She knew who it was. Jackson Browne had been trying to reach him for 2 days. John picked up the receiver and said nothing at first. He just listened. On the other end, Jackson's voice was low, careful, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping child. He didn't say hello, he didn't apologize for calling so late, he just said, "I don't know if I should have called." John sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, still in his jacket, still smelling like cigarette smoke and coffee and the faint chemical scent of recording tape. YOKO stayed by the window, her reflection pale in the glass, her face unreadable. The city below them hummed with its usual noise, cars and voices and distant sirens, but inside that apartment, everything went quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone is about to say something they've been holding on to for too long. Jackson Browne was 32 years old. He had been famous for nearly a decade, known for songs that carved open the chest and left you looking at your own heart. Songs about loneliness and love and the strange, painful distance between who you are and who you wanted to be. But fame hadn't softened him. It had done the opposite. He had become careful, controlled, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of being misunderstood. He had been writing a song for months, something about loss and time and the feeling that you can't go back. But the words wouldn't come. He kept circling the same verse, the same melody, and every time he tried to finish it, he felt like he was lying, like he was pretending to understand something he didn't. So he called John Lennon, not because they were close friends, but because John had done something Jackson couldn't figure out how to do. John had walked away. He had stopped making music for 5 years, stopped performing, stopped chasing the thing that had made him who he was. And then, just months ago, he had come back. Not louder, not angrier, quieter, more certain, like someone who had been lost and then found the path again. Not because someone showed it to him, but because he stopped looking for it and it appeared on its own. Jackson wanted to know how that happened. He wanted to know if it was possible to stop without disappearing, if it was possible to come back without pretending the time away didn't matter. John didn't say anything for the first 30 seconds. He just held the phone and stared at the floor, at the pattern in the carpet that he had looked at 1,000 times before. YOKO could see his shoulders drop, the way they did when he was deciding whether to let someone in or shut them out. She had seen him do this with journalists, with old friends, with people who wanted something from him that he didn't know how to give. Finally, he said, "You still there?" Jackson said yes. John said, "You want me to tell you it's going to be okay?" It wasn't a question, it was a statement, flat and tired, the way someone talks when they've heard the same request in different forms too many times to count. Jackson didn't answer right away. He was sitting in his kitchen in Los Angeles, the lights off, the phone cord stretched across the table. He had a notebook in front of him, but he wasn't writing. He was just listening. Outside his window, the street was empty. It was late there, too. He had thought about not calling. He had thought about waiting until morning or not calling at all, because what if John thought he was weak? What if John thought he was, wasting his time? What if John didn't remember who he was? But the feeling wouldn't go away, the feeling that if he didn't ask now, he never would. Jackson said, "I want you to tell me how you stopped being afraid." There was a long pause. YOKO moved away from the window and sat down across from John, watching him. She had heard this question before in different forms from different people. Everyone wanted to know how John had survived the silence, the judgment, the years when people said he was finished, irrelevant, a relic of a time that had already passed. But John never gave the same answer twice, because the truth kept changing. Because the answer depended on the day, on the mood, on how much sleep he had, on whether he was feeling generous or tired or angry at the world. He leaned back and closed his eyes. "I didn't stop being afraid," he said. "I just stopped pretending I wasn't." Jackson was quiet. He was thinking about the years he had spent pretending he had it together, pretending he knew what he was doing, pretending the songs came easy, that the words arrived fully formed, that he wasn't terrified every time he stepped on stage that people would see through him and realize he was just making it up as he went along. He said, "How do you do that?" John opened his eyes. He looked at YOKO and she gave him a small, almost invisible nod, the kind of nod that said, "Go ahead, tell him the truth." He said, "What's the song about?" Jackson hesitated. He had told people bits and pieces of it, vague descriptions that didn't really say anything, but he hadn't told anyone the truth, not even himself, not fully. He said, "It's about my son. It's about time. It's about feeling like I missed something I can't get back." John didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there holding the phone, and YOKO watched him, and she could see the shift in his face, the way the walls came down. She had seen it before, but not often. It only happened when someone said something true enough that John couldn't ignore it, when someone cracked themselves open just a little bit and showed him what was inside. John had spent most of his life building walls, but when someone else took theirs down first, he couldn't help but follow. "You didn't miss it," John said finally. His voice was different now, softer, more careful. "You just think you did because you weren't paying attention the way you wanted to. But he was there. You were there. It still happened." Jackson's voice cracked a little. "How do you know?" "Because I did the same thing," John said. "I spent 5 years trying to pay attention, and I still felt like I was missing it. I still felt like I wasn't enough. I still felt like I was doing it wrong. But Sean didn't need me to be enough. He just needed me to be there, and I was, even when I thought I wasn't, even when I was standing right next to him and my mind was somewhere else. I was still there. There was a sound on the other end of the line, something between a breath and a laugh." Jackson said, "I don't know how to finish the song." John leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He was looking at the floor again, but this time he was thinking about something specific. Something he hadn't thought about in a long time. He was thinking about the day he decided to stop making music, the day he realized that he had been running for so long that he didn't even know what he was running from anymore. He was thinking about the fear that came with that decision, the fear that if he stopped, he would disappear, that people would forget him, that he would forget himself. And he was thinking about the day years later when he realized that he hadn't disappeared at all, that he was more himself than he had ever been. "Then don't finish it," John said. Jackson didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe it's not supposed to be finished. Maybe it's supposed to stay open. Maybe that's the whole point." Jackson was silent. He was looking at the notebook in front of him, at the half-written lyrics, at the lines he had crossed out and rewritten and crossed out again. He had always thought that a song needed to have an ending, needed to have a resolution, needed to tell people what it meant and how they should feel about it. But John was saying something different. John was saying that maybe the best songs were the ones that didn't explain themselves, the ones that left you sitting in the feeling without telling you what to do with it. YOKO stood up and walked into the kitchen, giving John space, but she could still hear his voice through the doorway. She had learned over the years that John was two different people depending on who he was talking to. With most people he was guarded, sarcastic, quick to shut things down. He had built a persona, a version of himself that could handle the world, that could deflect questions and avoid pain and keep moving forward without ever stopping to feel anything. But with someone who was really asking, really trying to understand something, he softened. He became the person he had been before the world told him who he had to be, the person who was still figuring it out, the person who was still scared. Jackson said, "I'm scared people won't care anymore. I'm scared I've already said everything I had to say." John smiled, even though Jackson couldn't see it. It was a tired smile, the kind that comes from recognizing something in someone else that you thought was only in yourself. "Yeah," he said, "I know that feeling. What do you do with it?" John thought for a moment. He was thinking about the 5 years he had spent away from music, the 5 years when people wrote articles about him saying he was washed up, saying he was irrelevant, saying he would never make anything good again. He was thinking about the nights he spent lying awake, wondering if they were right, wondering if he had anything left to say, wondering if coming back would just prove that he should have stayed away. He was thinking about the moment he decided to come back anyway, not because he had figured it all out, but because he realized that the fear would never go away, and he was tired of letting it make his decisions for him. "I let it be there," John said. "I don't try to fix it. I don't try to prove it wrong. I just let it sit in the room with me, and I keep working anyway." Jackson was quiet. He was thinking about all the times he had tried to outrun the fear, all the times he had tried to write his way out of it, to perform his way out of it, to prove to himself and everyone else that he was still good, still relevant, still worth listening to. And he was realizing that maybe that was the problem. Maybe the fear wasn't something you could outrun. Maybe it was something you just had to carry with you. He said, "That's it? That's the answer?" John laughed, a short, tired laugh. "There's no answer, man. There's just what you do next." The call went on for another 15 minutes, but the tone changed. It wasn't about advice anymore. It wasn't about fear or failure or what people would think. It became something smaller, more personal. John told Jackson about a song he had just recorded, something called "Beautiful Boy," and how he almost didn't put it on the album because it felt too soft, too vulnerable. He told Jackson about the moment he realized that softness wasn't weakness, that the things that scared him most were the things people needed to hear. He told Jackson about the first time he played it for YOKO, how she had cried, and how he had almost taken it back, almost said, "Never mind, it's stupid," but she had stopped him and said, "No, it's perfect. Leave it alone." Jackson told John about a night he spent with his son, just the two of them, driving down the coast with no plan, no destination. He told John how his son had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, and Jackson had kept driving, not because he was going anywhere, but because he didn't want the moment to end. He told John that he had been trying to write about that night for months, but every version of the song felt wrong, felt like he was trying too hard to make it mean something. Like he was trying to turn a small, perfect moment into a big, important statement, and in the process he was losing the thing that made it matter in the first place. John said, "Maybe it doesn't have to mean anything. Maybe it just has to feel like that night." Jackson said, "How do I do that?" John said, "You stop trying to explain it. You just sing it." YOKO came back into the room and sat down again. She could see that John was different now, lighter, more present. This was the version of him she had fought to protect for 5 years, the version that didn't he have to perform, didn't have to prove anything, didn't have to be John Lennon the legend. Just John, the person who still didn't know what he was doing most of the time, but who kept trying anyway. The person who made mistakes and felt scared and loved his son and tried to be better than he was the day before. She had watched him become that person slowly, painfully, through years of silence and doubt and the hard work of figuring out who he was when no one was watching. Jackson said, "Can I ask you something else?" John said, "Yeah. Do you ever regret stopping? Do you ever wish you'd kept going, kept making records, kept being out there?" John didn't answer right away. He looked at YOKO, and she looked back at him, and something passed between them that didn't need words. It was a look that contained 5 years of conversations, 5 years of arguments and reconciliations and quiet mornings and long nights. 5 years of learning how to be still, how to be present, how to be enough without needing the world to tell him he was. Finally he said, "No, I don't regret it, but I don't think I would have come back if I had." Jackson didn't understand. "What do you mean?" "I mean I had to stop being who everyone thought I was so I could figure out who I actually was. And that took time. It took longer than I thought it would. It took years of feeling like I was wasting my life, like I was throwing away the only thing I was good at. But I'm glad I did it, because now I'm not scared of disappearing. I already did that, and I'm still here." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Jackson was thinking about what that would mean for him, what it would feel like to walk away, to stop, to let the world move on without him for a while. He was thinking about whether he had the courage to do that, whether he trusted himself enough to believe he would still be there on the other side. He was thinking about his son, about the nights he had missed, the moments he had traded for recording sessions and tour dates and interviews, and he was wondering if it was too late to get some of that back. Then Jackson said, very quietly, "Thank you." John said, "For what?" "For picking up." John smiled. "Yeah, well, don't make it a habit." They both laughed, and the sound of it was soft, almost fragile, like something that could break if you held it too tight. Then Jackson said he had to go, that he'd taken up enough of John's time, and John said it wasn't about time, it was never about time, but he understood. They said goodbye, and John hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, staring at the receiver in his hand, thinking about the sound of Jackson's voice, the way it had changed over the course of the conversation, the way it had gone from tight and controlled to open and uncertain. YOKO said, "That was good of you." John shrugged. He didn't need me to fix anything. He just needed someone to tell him it was okay to not know. YOKO nodded. She walked over and sat beside him, and they stayed like that for a while, not talking, just sitting in the quiet of the apartment. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the city lights reflected off the wet pavement, turning everything soft and blurred. John thought about the song he had been working on earlier that day, the one he couldn't get right, and he realized that maybe it was okay if he never got it right. Maybe it was okay if it stayed unfinished. Maybe it was okay if he just kept working on it until he didn't feel like working on it anymore, and then he moved on to something else. 3 weeks later, John Lennon was dead, shot outside the Dakota building by a man who had asked for his autograph hours earlier. The world stopped. The news spread in waves, disbelief and grief and anger, and for days people couldn't do anything but cry and play his music and try to understand how something like that could happen, how someone who had given so much, who had tried so hard to be honest and kind and human, could be taken away like that in a moment by someone who didn't even know him. Jackson Browne heard the news the next morning. He was in his kitchen again, the same place he had been when he made the call. He didn't move. He didn't cry. He just sat there staring at the phone, thinking about the last thing John had said to him. "I'm not scared of disappearing. I already did that. And I'm still here." But he wasn't here anymore. Jackson didn't talk about the call for years. He didn't tell anyone what John had said, didn't write about it, didn't try to make sense of it. He just kept working. He finished the song about his son, and it stayed open, unresolved, the way John had told him it should. He released it, and people listened, and some of them understood, and some of them didn't, and that was okay. He kept making music, kept touring, kept writing songs that tried to say something true, and every time he felt the fear coming back, the fear that he had nothing left to say. He remembered what John had told him. "I let it be there. I don't try to fix it. I just keep working anyway. Decades passed. Jackson kept making music, kept performing, kept showing up even when he didn't feel like it, even when the fear was louder than the music. He watched the world change, watched new artists come and go, watched the industry shift and evolve, and he stayed. Not because he was trying to prove something, but because he didn't know what else to do. Because the work was the only thing that made sense, the only thing that felt real. In 2024, Yoko Ono, now 91 years old, gave a rare interview. She was frail but sharp, her voice steady, her eyes still bright. She was asked about John's final months, about the songs he had been working on, about the life he had built in those 5 years away from the world. And then, near the end of the interview, she was asked if there was anything people didn't know, anything that hadn't been told, anything that had been kept private all these years. She thought for a moment. Her face was calm, but there was something in her eyes, something that looked like memory and loss and the strange, quiet sadness that comes from outliving the person you loved most. Then she said, "There was a phone call, 3 weeks before he died. Jackson Browne called. They talked for 18 minutes. The interviewer leaned forward. What did they talk about?" Yoko said, "Fear. And how to keep going when you don't know if what you're doing matters." The interviewer asked what John said. Yoko smiled, a small, sad smile. He said it's okay to not know. He said you just keep working anyway. The interviewer waited, but Yoko didn't say anything else. She just looked out the window, the same window she had stood by that night, and for a moment, it was like she was back there, watching John on the phone, watching him be kind to someone he barely knew, watching him be the person he had fought so hard to become. She thought about how many times she had watched him do that, how many times he had given pieces of himself to people who needed something he didn't even know he had. And she thought about how much it had cost him, how much he had given away, and how he had never asked for anything back. The interview ended. Yoko's words were published and people read them, and some of them cried, and some of them nodded, and some of them went back to their own work, their own fear, their own uncertainty, and they kept going. Jackson Browne was asked about it a few months later. He was sitting in a dressing room before a show, tuning his guitar, and someone mentioned the interview, mentioned Yoko, mentioned the phone call. Jackson stopped tuning. He looked up, and for a moment he didn't say anything. Then he said, "Yeah, that happened." The reporter asked what John had told him. Jackson looked down at his hands, the same hands that had written 1,000 songs, the same hands that had held the phone that night. He said, "He told me it was okay to not have the answers. He told me to stop trying to be perfect. He told me to just keep going." The reporter asked if it helped. Jackson nodded slowly. "Yeah, it did. It still does." That night, Jackson played the song he had written about his son. He had played it 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different cities, for 1,000 different crowds. But this time, he played it differently. Slower. Quieter. Like he was singing it to one person, not a crowd. Like he was singing it to John, wherever he was, if he was anywhere at all. And when he got to the end, the part that never quite resolves, the part that just fades out without a final answer, he let it hang there in the air, unfinished, open, the way John had told him it should be. The audience was silent. And then, slowly, they started to clap. Not because the song had given them an answer, but because it had reminded them that it was okay not to have one. Because it had reminded them that life doesn't resolve the way songs are supposed to, that most things stay open, that most questions don't get answered, and that's not a failure. That's just how it is. Backstage, Jackson sat alone in the quiet, and he thought about that phone call, about John's voice, about the way he had said, "I'm not scared of disappearing. I already did that, and I'm still here." And Jackson thought, you are still here. You're still here in every person who keeps going even when they're scared. You're still here in every song that doesn't have an ending. You're still here in every conversation like the one we had, where someone tells someone else that it's okay to not know, that it's okay to be afraid, that it's okay to just keep working anyway. The world had lost John Lennon. But the things he had said, the things he had given to people in small, quiet moments, those didn't disappear. They stayed. They rippled out through phone calls and songs and conversations, through fear and doubt and the decision to keep going anyway, through the choice to be kind when you don't have to be honest when it would be easier to lie, to pick up the phone when you're tired and someone needs to hear your voice. Jackson picked up his guitar and played a few chords, nothing in particular, just something to fill the silence. And somewhere in the spaces between the notes, he could still hear John's voice, steady and tired and kind, saying the thing that had kept him going for all these years. You don't have to know, you just have to keep working. And so he did, night after night, year after year, show after show, not because he had figured it all out, not because the fear had gone away, but because John had told him it was okay to keep going anyway, and that was enough. That had to be enough. And somehow, impossibly, it was.